Hi, my name is Delara. I wore the uniform of a general, led teams into danger, was trusted with secrets that could collapse governments, but at my own wedding, I wasn't trusted with the truth. While I stood in my bridal suite, moments from saying I do, my stepmother stormed in, holding photos, whispering betrayal. She told me my fiancé had another woman. She thought I'd fall apart, but she didn't know. I've survived more than lies. And when the photographer stood and said, "General, I've investigated," everything unraveled. They tried to break me at the altar. But why would a woman trained for war ever be surprised by an ambush? Want to know what else they planned before my vows? The garden looked like something straight out of a wedding magazine. Vera had pulled out all the stops, twinkling string lights overhead, linen-draped tables perfectly aligned under trimmed oaks, and the kind of floral arrangements that whispered money without needing to scream it. But even with all that beauty, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was staged. I've learned to trust that instinct. In my line of work, pretty never means safe. I stood near the edge of the patio, my eyes sweeping the crowd while I sipped a watered-down cocktail. Kyle was talking with his brother a few feet away. I caught his eye briefly. He smiled. I smiled back. But neither of us walked toward the other. Maybe that was the first crack. Maybe it had started earlier and I just hadn't noticed. The rehearsal dinner had been in full swing for about an hour when Vera clinked her glass, the universal sign that a toast was coming. Everyone quieted. She stood, wearing a tight ivory dress she absolutely knew skirted bridal boundaries, and raised her wine. To love, to new beginnings, and to the bride and groom, she purred. Then she turned to me with that calculated grin and added, "Handsome men are hard to keep, don't you think, Delara?" I didn't react immediately, not outwardly, but inside I felt a shift, like a slow crack beneath still ice. Nervous chuckles spread across the table, and someone muttered, "Oh, Vera," like she was just being playful. But I knew better. She wasn't joking. She was warning. Jolene, my mother, cut her eyes at Vera with a look that could burn through wallpaper. Kyle shifted in his chair, his hand reaching for mine under the table, giving it a light squeeze, but his eyes stayed down. He didn't defend me. He didn't even look up. I took a long breath and smiled. That's what I'd been trained to do. Smile under pressure. Smile when someone's trying to chip at your worth in public. Smile when you're being baited. It's not silence, it's control. We moved on to the next course, and the buzz of small talk returned. But my ears stayed alert. I caught the faintest note of something else, something acidic hidden beneath the buttery wine and polite laughter. Later, after dessert, my father stood to give his remarks. Elliot had never been comfortable in the spotlight, but he always showed up when expected. That used to be enough. "We're thrilled to see Delara, starting this new chapter in life," he said, his voice wavering at the stumble. There was an awkward pause. Some people laughed gently, trying to smooth it over. I didn't. My stomach clenched, not because of the mistake, but because of the moment Callista smirked, subtle, just enough for me to notice, and Vera leaned over to tap Elliot's knee as if to say, "Oh well, darling, no big deal," but it was. I smiled again, the kind that makes your cheeks ache and your throat burn. The night wound down like a watch with a cracked spring. Conversations faded, chairs scraped, people hugged goodbye. I waited until most had left before gathering my clutch and stepping away from the center of the party. I walked along the hedged path toward the driveway, my heels clicking softly against the flagstone. That's when I heard them, Vera and Callista. Their voices floated from behind the linen storage tent, hushed but clear. "Let's make sure she gets exactly what she deserves," Vera said, her tone sharp and quiet. I froze. My hand went to my phone, not to record, but to ground myself. I didn't move. I didn't confront. I just listened. And in that moment, the ice beneath me didn't crack. It shattered. They didn't know about the part of me that didn't need an audience. They didn't know that I've fought in deserts where bullets flew before breakfast, or that I've kept secrets bigger than either of them could imagine. They thought I was just the quiet one. The nice one, the one who got lucky landing a man like Kyle. But they had no idea they were dealing with a general. After hearing Vera's whisper behind that tent, I didn't sleep much. Not that I expected to. My body was at rest, but my mind was already mapping the battlefield. The next evening came faster than I thought it would. Jolene and I were still at the hotel room, and I'd just helped her finish her hair. She looked stunning, dignified and calm, like a woman who'd survived many silent wars without ever raising her voice. That was something I learned from her. Power didn't always shout. Sometimes it just walked into the room and didn't apologize for being there. "I'm fine getting ready on my own now, honey," she said softly, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. "Go ahead without me. I'll be right behind." By the time I got to the estate, the sun had dipped low, casting everything in that strange golden light that makes even the ugliest truths look picturesque. The dinner was set up in the back garden, the same location as last night. Familiar faces were already seated. Servers moved in practiced lines between tables, refilling glasses and clearing appetizers. As I approached the host table, I noticed something strange. My place card, Delara, was far down the line, at the opposite end of where Kyle was seated. His name was 2 chairs away from Vera. Mine, nestled right next to the walkway leading to the kitchen. The catering crew's exit door was my view for the evening. I stopped, scanned again. No mistake. I looked over at Vera, who happened to glance up just in time to see me hesitating. She tilted her head slightly and smiled, the kind you reserve for someone you think won't make a scene. One of the guests looked up and joked, "You sure you're not the event planner tonight, Delara? That seat's got command view of the service door." I laughed lightly. Guess I'm keeping the operation running smooth. But inside, I was doing recon. My chair was lower than the others. Just slightly, but enough to notice. Callista's, meanwhile, was high-backed, velvet-cushioned, almost a throne. She raised her glass to me from across the table. Her smile, smug and silent, said more than words could ever manage. I took my seat, smiled, nodded at a few guests. Kyle caught my eye but didn't make a move. I couldn't tell if he even noticed where they'd placed me. Maybe he did. Maybe he was playing it safe. Or maybe he was just that used to me adjusting. Dinner moved forward. Appetizers, drinks, and a steady hum of conversation. It wasn't until dessert that the main blow landed. As we lifted forks to the final course, a projector screen behind the head table flickered to life. Vera tapped a spoon to her wine glass. "Before we wrap up, a little tribute," she said sweetly, gesturing toward the glowing screen. Photos scrolled by, Vera hosting, Callista placing table settings, Vera again shaking hands with the florist. Background music played softly beneath a voiceover. Vera's voice. "Thank you to my darling Callista, our social sunshine," the voice said, glowing images of her daughter flashing behind it. "And to all who made this evening magical, especially our planner, our staff, and of course, Vera." The crowd clapped lightly. Some smiled politely, others avoided eye contact. There was no mention of me. Jolene turned toward me, her expression unreadable. But I saw the set of her jaw. Matthias leaned in, his whisper low. "Maybe it's a mistake," he said, eyes on the screen. I didn't look at him. I just murmured, Mistakes don't repeat in patterns. The applause died down, conversation resumed, but in my mind, something else was beginning to solidify, a new clarity. I excused myself from the table, nodding softly to Kyle. He started to rise, but I waved him off gently. I made my way past the kitchen door and into the staff corridor, then slipped into the edge of the catering zone. One of the younger servers glanced up, startled. "Sorry, just needed a second," I said. She nodded and smiled. "You're her, right?" "Excuse me?" "The general. A few of us saw the news clip when you got pinned. We remember you." For a moment, I couldn't find words. "Thank you," I managed. "They ignore you until they need you, or fear you," she added, wiping a tray. I smiled again, not out of politeness, but recognition. As I stepped back outside, I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a number under a simple alias, tapped out a message. "Need a favor. Quiet investigation. Just photos for now." No need for explanations. The person on the other end would know what I meant. I'd been patient. I'd been polite. But I was done letting people design a story I had no say in. They wanted to rewrite me out of the narrative. They forgot. I write my own orders. I didn't wake up so much as I surfaced, like dragging myself out of water that didn't want to let go. My body felt rested, but my mind hadn't stopped circling since the moment Vera whispered those words behind the tent. "Let's make sure she gets exactly what she deserves." That sentence played on loop through my dreams, though in them it wasn't just a whisper, it echoed. I brewed coffee without thinking. The aroma filled the apartment, but it didn't ground me the way it usually did. I carried the mug to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened my laptop. There were a few vendor follow-ups, a message from Kyle confirming pickup for the guest welcome bags. But one subject line caught my eye, and it wasn't from anyone I recognized. "Know who you're marrying?" My pulse skipped, not because I believed anything yet, but because I'd learned to respect red flags when they came without fanfare. I clicked, one image, attached without comment. It loaded slowly, like it knew it carried weight. A man, tall, familiar posture, embracing a woman in a maroon coat. The shot was from behind, blurry, like it had been taken in secret, possibly through a window. It was hard to be certain, but it looked like Kyle. My hands didn't shake, not really, but they stilled. The cursor hovered for a few seconds before I downloaded the photo, encrypted it into a secure folder, and deleted the email. I didn't forward it. I didn't reply. I didn't panic. Instead, I whispered to myself, "Noted." I knew how to read moves before they landed. And this was someone testing my center of gravity. I took a breath and opened my texts, thinking I might scroll through messages from the bridal group chat just to distract myself. That's when another ping came in, a direct message on social media from Trina Pearson. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Kyle introduced her as one of his college friends. "Hey, Delara. I know this is probably none of my business, but something's been bugging me. Back in school, Callista used to tell everyone she and Kyle had a thing. She made it seem serious. I never thought to ask him about it, but with everything you're planning right now, I just thought you should know." I stared at the screen for a long moment, not because I didn't believe her. I did, but because I realized how much I hadn't asked. I'd assumed, or worse, I'd chosen not to ask. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I started to type, then deleted every word. Instead, I set the phone down, walked to the window, and stared out across the quiet street. Trust, once broken, turns questions into instincts. That quote floated through my mind like a cold wind through an open window. It didn't matter if the photo was fake, or if Callista was lying again. What mattered was that the story was being built behind my back, and someone wanted it to reach me now. I walked back to my desk and opened the image in editing software. I checked the file's metadata. The timestamp said 3 nights ago. Location data was stripped, but I recognized the lighting of the cafe. They'd been there before. I picked up my phone and called a number listed only under the name C. When he picked up, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "The photo came through," I said. "We proceed." He didn't ask for details. He never did. Carmichael was a professional, ex-military, now freelancing in digital investigation and strategic surveillance. He knew exactly how to work beneath the noise. I printed the image, sealed it in a manila envelope marked Op. Artemis, and slid it into the small safe built into my office wall. Not because I needed the backup, but because documentation is a form of clarity. In war, you don't just fight the visible battles, you protect the invisible ones. An hour later, I left the apartment. I had errands, florist drop-offs, a vendor meeting, but I paused as I stepped out of my building. Across the street, Callista stood with one of Kyle's groomsmen. Marcus, I think. They were laughing. She leaned in close, whispered something, and then they both looked up. At me, their smiles weren't wide, just enough to signal something. And right there, in that moment, I realized this wasn't panic. It was coordination. By late afternoon, the air had that heavy kind of heat that clings to your skin and makes silk feel like wool. Vera, of course, insisted the weather was perfect for a relaxed family gathering before the big day. She said it with that signature breathiness of hers, like she was granting us all some gracious opportunity. The garden at her house had been transformed, again. Bistro lights crisscrossed the yard, throw pillows scattered over rented outdoor loungers, and tiny name tags on napkins that somehow left me feeling like an extra in my own production. She called it casual, but I knew better. This wasn't about relaxation. It was staging, controlled optics, strategic positioning. I recognized it the moment I stepped onto the patio. Kyle was seated across from Callista, and they were both laughing too easily, the kind of laugh people lean into when there's an audience. Vera floated between groups, guiding conversations like a hostess playing chess with real people. And just as I set my drink down, one of Kyle's friends, Chase maybe, tilted his head toward them and asked, "You two grew up together, huh?" Callista grinned, brushing a hand through her waves. "You could say that." Kyle didn't correct her. He just took a sip of his beer and looked off. Some people plant rumors the way they plant flowers, hoping they bloom at just the right time. And Vera? She was practically a horticulturist. I stayed near the edge of the patio for a while, keeping my distance, letting the noise blur. Then came the garden games, something about bean bags and a makeshift target. Kyle ended up sitting on a bench, laughing with a couple of his cousins. I watched as Callista strutted over, drink in hand, and sat beside him, too close. Her hand dropped to his thigh. There wasn't anything accidental about it. Jolene saw it. From across the yard, I felt her eyes cut to me, then back to them. But I didn't flinch. I didn't storm over. In war, reacting first is how you lose control. Let them move. Let them miscalculate. Let them underestimate. Kyle shifted slightly, uncomfortable, but not enough to pull away. And just when the tension ticked high enough to be seen, Vera stepped in with perfect timing. "Callista, sweetheart, can you help me find the photo I love from dinner the other night?" Right. A photo. Within minutes, Callista had her phone connected to the small screen Vera had set up under the guise of group memories. One tap and there it was, a dimly lit restaurant shot. Candles, red wine. Callista beaming into the camera, her cheek subtly angled toward Kyle, who appeared mid-laugh, face tilted close. The image was designed to make you question things. "Oh, that one," Vera cooed. "Didn't you say the waiter thought you two were a couple?" People chuckled. Matthias glanced toward me, eyebrows slightly raised. I smiled, stood up, lifted my glass. "You have to love a woman confident enough to self-promote at someone else's wedding," I said smoothly. A few people laughed, a little too loudly. The air around the table tensed just enough to let Callista's smirk flatten. "They'll test your silence," I thought. "Make it your sharpest blade." I excused myself and headed inside the house. The upstairs den, quiet and undisturbed, offered a clear view of the backyard through its large window. I sat down at Vera's old writing desk, pulled my phone from my clutch, and opened the surveillance app Carmichael had set up. Discrete cameras were embedded in a few strategic garden angles. There she was, Callista, perched next to Kyle, her hand on his leg. There was Vera, cueing the display moment, smiling like she'd just pulled off a diplomatic win. I clicked save, tagged the footage, opened my private notes app, and began logging. Callista went physical. Vera used social bait. Kyle unaware, but complicit through silence. They weren't dumb, but they weren't subtle either. The attack had begun. It just wasn't loud. It was perfectly dressed in cocktail dresses and wine. I stood, walked over to the bookshelf, and stared out the window again. The sun was dipping low, casting long, crooked shadows across Vera's expensive landscaping. I texted Carmichael, "Shift from passive collection to full trace. I want every contact Callista's had this week." There was no need for formalities. He replied with a single dot. We were past protocols now. Below, Vera clinked glasses with her neighbor, her voice drifting just far enough into the air. "By tomorrow, we'll be one bride lighter." She said it like a joke, but I wasn't laughing. Evening wrapped around the apartment like a damp blanket. Jolene was already in the kitchen when I got home, humming low under her breath while unpacking something wrapped in soft lavender paper. The scent of citrus cleaner hung in the air, a comfort I didn't realize I'd need. "I stopped by the post office," she said casually, lifting the box toward me. "This came from Vera's printer." I paused, something inside me tightening. "You opened it?" She shook her head. "I wanted you to see it first." The box felt heavier than it should have. I carried it to the dining table, unwrapped the outer layer, and opened the lid. Inside, stacked neatly, were the wedding invitations, embossed in gold foil, on paper that cost more than my monthly utility bill. I picked up the top card. Matthias Callista. My name was nowhere. The room shifted. Not the furniture. Me. My balance. My air. My blood. Jolene noticed immediately. "What is it?" I flipped the card around and held it up to her, saying nothing. She grabbed it, read it, and froze. "They didn't..." Her voice sharpened. "You call her right now. I don't care how late it is. This is not a mistake. This is a goddamn insult." I shook my head, already pulling out my laptop. "No, this isn't a mistake," I said, voice quiet but flat. "It's a message." It took all of 2 phone calls to get what I needed. I posed as Vera's assistant and called the print shop. The woman on the other end was pleasant, professional. She didn't hesitate. Yes, the Matthias Callista design was approved by email, twice actually. "We have the sign-off here." I thanked her, hung up, and closed my eyes for a long breath. "I once held war briefings," I whispered. "Now I'm being written out of my own life." Jolene stood at the counter, arms folded tightly. "This is too far." "They're not being careless," I said. "They're being precise." Later that night, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my calendar invites, another ping came in. A screenshot from Fiona. "Thought you'd want to see this," her message read. It was a group chat titled, "Wedding VIP Timeline." Members, Vera, Callista, Kyle, 2 decorators. I wasn't in it. I read through the messages. Vera, let's make sure everything is seamless. No surprises Saturday. Fiona, they didn't even CC you on the lighting change. There it was, undeniable. The cruelest manipulation isn't control, it's exclusion. I stared at the screen for a moment, then tossed my phone onto the coffee table. I stood and walked to my office, my version of a war room. The board was already set up, a web of images and vendor names pinned across the cork surface. I tagged the new file, Intentional Identity Displacement, Level Red, invoices, email chains, calendar invites. I found at least 4 places where Callista's name had replaced mine. Florals, photographer, reception signage, shuttle schedules. They weren't messy, they were organized, but so was I. I sent a secure link to Carmichael. Message read, upload complete, beginning asset trace. No response necessary. At midnight, I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, the laptop casting a pale glow on my face. I opened my wedding planner, flipped to the back, and pulled out a new page. It was blank. I wrote a heading. Memo to self, day of. I jotted down a single line underneath. Let them walk into a ceremony designed by a ghost. As I closed the planner, a ping landed softly on my phone. Carmichael. We traced the edits. You'll want to see this. I didn't open the attachment yet. I just whispered into the silence of the room. They buried the wrong woman. It was one of those early afternoons that should have felt casual, easy, even celebratory. But nothing felt light about that day. Vera had organized a surprise display at a local gallery, claiming it was a tribute to Kyle and me. A pre-wedding toast to love, legacy, and, her words, a couple destined for the spotlight. The invite said 2:00. I didn't show up until 2:45. I'd been delayed by a strategy briefing back at base. Real lives, real deployments, real weight. Meanwhile, Vera was staging another scene built on illusion. When I finally walked into the gallery, I was greeted by champagne flutes and curated laughter. Oil paintings lined the walls, none of which I recognized. Several faces turned to me, smiling too quickly. Callista was front and center, standing beside Kyle, her hand on his shoulder like it belonged there. The air in the room shifted the second I entered. Vera rushed toward me, arms outstretched. Delara, darling, we were starting to think you'd skip your own love story. I kissed her cheek, barely. I was busy living a real one. As I scanned the space, I noticed something strange. On a central corkboard titled Family Moments, a new photograph had been pinned in the very center. Candles flickering in the background, Callista leaning in close, whispering something into Kyle's ear. His expression frozen somewhere between amusement and confusion. They looked involved, at least in the way the photo was framed, but I knew that look on Kyle's face. He hadn't expected it. Still, optics mattered. Was that from last Thursday? Someone asked, walking by with a wine glass. Dinner at Andiamo, Vera chimed in. The waiter said they looked like a couple straight out of a magazine. She laughed like it was all harmless fun. Callista flashed me a look, not quite smug, not quite innocent. I didn't respond. I didn't ask questions. I just looked at Kyle. He was quiet, offering a shrug that said, I didn't plan this. That shrug wasn't good enough. Later, I stepped outside for air. That's when I spotted my father standing near the sculpture garden, sipping from a glass of sparkling cider. I walked over, my heels crunching softly on the gravel. Did you see that photo? I asked, careful to keep my voice even. He gave a nod, not looking directly at me. I saw it. I waited. Nothing. You see what they're doing, right? I pressed. How far they're going to turn this into something it's not? Elliot looked uncomfortable, tugging at the sleeve of his blazer. Delara, you're overreacting. Let them have their fun. Don't make a scene. And just like that, something in me stiffened, not broke, just froze into place. They count on my silence, I thought. They bank on my rank, keeping me restrained. I didn't respond. I turned around and walked away. Not hurried, not dramatic, just certain. Back home that evening, I closed the blinds in my office and turned on my secured monitor. I called Carmichael. She staged it, I said. You're sure? I'm sure, I said. And I want the photographer ID'd. Within the hour, he sent me a file. The woman behind the camera had worked with Vera before. Charity galas, fashion week, private events. I asked for everything, emails, contracts, timestamps, and there they were. PDF invoices with notes like, position bride-to-be adjacent to groom-to-be for emotional impact. I highlighted that line, saved it under a folder labeled, narrative manipulation, confirmed. Every move scripted, every angle weaponized. I pulled out the gallery shot, compared it side by side with a candid from my phone. Same night. Different truths. I added both images to a master file. Truth versus Ooze Fiction. Visual Record 1. At 8:14 p.m., Carmichael sent one last file. Zipped. Labeled, staging evidence, confirmed. I opened it. Photos, contracts, metadata, and at the very end, a shot that stopped me mid-scroll. Callista, standing in the alley behind the gallery, handing a white envelope to the photographer. The vineyard shimmered under soft golden lights that clung to the trellises like fireflies in formation. Jazz played low beneath the clinks of wine glasses, laughter drifting between guests like practiced choreography. This wasn't a party. It was a performance. Vera stood near the terrace, drink in hand, mic already cued. To new beginnings, she called, smiling as if she'd birthed them herself. I stayed by the edge of the group, scanning the layout like it was a battlefield. Every table had been arranged for optics, not conversation. Every conversation was curated. It all looked effortless, which only meant one thing. It was meticulously rehearsed. That's when she arrived. Callista. She walked in late, always the grand entrance. Her gown, long, white, satin, clung to her like she'd stolen it straight off a mannequin labeled bride. Not off-white, not cream, white, with a slit that dared anyone to blink. A woman nearby leaned to her husband. Is she the bride? Wait, no. Oh. I heard it, so did everyone else. Kyle stood frozen near the wine table. I watched his eyes flit toward me, then back to her, and he didn't say a damn thing. The insult wasn't in the dress. It was in the timing. Callista began making her rounds like she owned the place, hugging Kyle, laughing a little too loud, tilting her head just right during selfies. Someone snapped a picture of Kyle between Callista and Vera, both in white, both smiling. I didn't flinch. I walked straight to a retired colonel I hadn't seen in years and asked about his daughter's deployment. Let the camera pan away. Let them perform. In battle, you don't challenge the decoy. You let her overperform. Eventually, she'll misstep on her own. After half an hour of watching the show unfold, Kyle slipped away to the back of the property. I followed at a distance, not to eavesdrop, but because I knew where the knives were being sharpened. I stopped near the pergola just as Vera leaned in close to him, her voice syrupy sweet. "You're a smart man, Kyle," she said. "You don't have to tie yourself down to something that'll exhaust you forever." There it was. He didn't reply right away, just stood there, jaw tense, rubbing his wrist like he wanted to disappear inside it. My hand curled around my glass. I didn't interrupt. I didn't breathe. When someone tells you who they fear, I thought, they'll try to sabotage them. Vera was afraid of me. That much was clear. Inside again, as the jazz faded into a soft piano tune, the floor opened for final toasts. I walked to the front before anyone else could claim the moment. Raising my glass, I let my voice steady. To those who smile when they want to scream, I said. To the ones who stay standing while others plan their fall. We see you, we remember, and we don't forget. Jolene nodded from her table. One of Kyle's uncles clapped, a little too quickly. Callista's smile cracked like cheap porcelain. Vera, ever the actress, sipped her wine without blinking. The party carried on, but it had shifted. When it was time to leave, I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I simply walked out, slipping through the gravel lot to my car. The air was cooler now, still, waiting. Inside, I opened the back seat and lifted the velvet cloth. My wedding dress wasn't white. It was deep navy, structured, strong, tailored to the inch with epaulets that nodded to rank without needing to scream it. No veil, no fluff, just presence. They wore lace to confuse, I whispered. I wear command to remind. Tomorrow would not be subtle. The bridal suite smelled of hairspray, roses, and nerves. My makeup had just been finished. The girls were laughing over some playlist issue with the DJ, but I wasn't listening. I was still. Even warriors feel something before the mission begins. This wasn't the trembling nervousness I expected on my wedding morning. It was the clarity before a calculated strike. Jolene stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the sun angle across the trees. She hadn't said much, and she didn't need to. We'd already shared the important things. I knew she was proud. She knew I wasn't afraid. I adjusted the cuff of my robe and took one deep breath before everything changed. The door burst open. Vera, in full makeup, heels, pearls, holding an envelope so stiff in her hands it looked like it had a heartbeat. I need to speak with Delara. Alone, she announced. Jolene stepped forward. Absolutely not. It's about Kyle. I raised my hand gently to calm my mother. Give us a minute, I said, never taking my eyes off Vera. The room emptied with soft resistance. Jolene was last to leave, staring at Vera like she might snap her in two. The moment the door clicked shut, Vera's voice lowered. I didn't want to do this, she said, stepping closer. But you're walking into a lie. She laid the photos down on the vanity in front of me. Kyle, a woman, the same brunette from the email weeks ago, this time clear, clean, no blur. They were at a cafe, sitting too close, mid-laugh, her hand brushing his. This is who he really is, Vera said. You're about to marry a liar. I didn't flinch. I didn't pick up the photos. I simply looked at her and said, You have 2 minutes. Then I escort you out. She smiled, not surprised, not even flustered. She thought this was her win. A man like Kyle with someone like you? She said, circling me like a fox sizing up a chained animal. He needs warmth, softness. Not someone people salute out of fear. That one cut, not because it was true, but because it echoed things I had once whispered to myself in darker moments. She thought I fought wars for pride. She never realized I survived them by not reacting to every shot fired. I turned slowly, picked up the photos, studied them. Then I walked to the door. Please come in. Jolene stepped in first, followed by Kyle and Matthias's father. All of them had been standing by. They'd known this confrontation was likely. I'd made sure of it. Kyle's eyes moved immediately to the photos. What's this? I laid them flat on the table. Please explain. Slowly. He blinked, brows furrowed. That's me and my cousin, Lydia. She moved here from Michigan last month. We had coffee last week to catch up. Jolene stepped forward. I met her at Thanksgiving. That's her. Vera's expression cracked, just slightly, enough for me to watch the paint peel. You came here to ruin her wedding with staged evidence? Jolene said, her voice cold and cutting. Vera opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came. I stared straight at her. It's not over, but your part in it is. A knock at the door. General? Carmichael's voice came through, calm and precise. The guest list is ready, and so is your moment. I turned to the mirror once more, adjusted the corner of my dress collar, and whispered to myself, let's give them a ceremony they won't forget. The courtyard buzzed like a hornet's nest under silk napkins and champagne flutes. Guests fanned themselves with folded programs, murmuring under their breath about the delay. Some checked their watches, others whispered guesses, traffic, a wardrobe issue, nerves. But Vera knew, Callista knew. They were both pacing under the shaded arch near the magnolia tree, Callista nervously tugging at her neckline, Vera whispering too fast and too close. I watched from behind the suite's curtain, calm on the outside, controlled at the core. Some people wait for the truth, I thought. Some people bring it. 30 minutes behind schedule, Carmichael stepped onto the small stage set beside the altar. He was dressed as always, simple, pressed, unobtrusive, a photographer by name, a specialist by training. The screen behind him flickered to life. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice calm and clear. Before the ceremony begins, the bride has asked me to clarify a few concerns that surfaced this morning. Gasps, movement. A few people turned fully in their chairs. Vera's hand gripped Callista's wrist. The screen showed two photographs side by side. On the left, a photo Vera had shown me. Kyle leaning close to a woman, her hand grazing his. On the right, the raw file. Wider frame, full context. The woman, Kyle's cousin, laughing at something on her phone. Kyle looking sideways, mid-blink. Carmichael continued. The original image was edited, cropped, recolored to imply intimacy that didn't exist. Here's the original metadata, time-stamped and geotagged, unaltered. Murmurs turned sharp. Jolene, seated near the front, crossed her arms and leaned back. Matthias's father nodded, slow and deliberate. Vera's knuckles were white. Furthermore, Carmichael said, this image was submitted to 2 online tabloids by an anonymous user. The submission email traces back to Vera Nolan's household IP. Silence, but he wasn't done. One more piece, he said, turning to a small speaker on the table. Audio captured during vendor walkthroughs earlier this week. A voice crackled through the speaker. It was Callista. Once she freaks out, Kyle will leave. I just need her to lose it once. The weight of her words dropped like a stone in still water. Gasps. Someone near the front dropped their glass. Callista stood up. That was taken out of context. A family friend from Kyle's side stood. There's no context for malice. Vera didn't move, her expression locked in place, like a mask too tight to remove. That's when I walked out. My dress, deep navy, structured, tailored like a command. I didn't walk like a bride. I walked like a verdict. I took the mic Carmichael offered without a word. This was never just about love, I said, voice even. It was about dignity, about who gets to define the story. And now, it's restored. No cheering. Just the quiet kind of applause that comes from people who have witnessed something true. Kyle stood at the edge of the aisle. He didn't rush. He didn't speak. He just walked to my side and took his place. Carmichael passed me a small black flash drive as he walked off stage. "There's more," he said quietly, "just in case." I tucked it into my palm, and we turned to face the crowd. The courtyard was quieter now, but it wasn't silence, it was stunned stillness, the kind that lingers after something breaks but hasn't finished falling. I stepped forward, just enough to reach the center. There was no trembling in my hands, no second-guessing in my voice, just the sound of heels on brick and the certainty of someone who had already buried the illusion that this would be a normal wedding. "I want to thank everyone here," I began, my tone calm, even, "for your patience, for listening to the truth, and for standing through discomfort to witness it." No one interrupted. Vera stared at the grass. Callista kept her head tilted slightly, feigning a distant distraction, but I knew she heard every word. "Vera Nolan," I said clearly, "is no longer a part of my life, or this ceremony." The weight of that sentence dropped heavy. Jolene stood slowly and walked toward me without hesitation. She reached for my arm, and we locked elbows. She didn't say anything, but I felt the power in her presence, more support than any veil or vow could ever give. Kyle stepped forward from the side and said, "It's about time." He didn't say it loud. He didn't need to. Vera took a few stuttered steps toward me. "Delara, please, that wasn't how this was supposed to." I raised a hand. "You didn't just plan a wedding," I said, voice still even. "You plotted a downfall, and failed." I nodded toward the staff at the edge of the tent. No words were needed. Two of them, both silent and professional, stepped in, one gently taking Vera's arm. She didn't resist, but her eyes screamed louder than she ever had. "You can forgive a thief," I said aloud, watching her retreat, "but not someone who steals your name and tries to bury it." I didn't wait for applause. This wasn't a movie. Just as I took a step back, Fiona came rushing up, holding something that looked oddly out of place among the crisp tablecloths and floral centerpieces, a small, torn envelope. "I found this near the trash behind the gift table," she whispered. "I don't think it was supposed to end up there." It was from my grandmother. The handwriting was hers, crooked, tender. Inside was a card, slightly smudged with what looked like damp fingerprints, burned along one corner, like someone had tried to accidentally damage it. "My strongest girl," it read. "Your strength is your legacy. I see you." Fiona added. Callista was the last one near the gifts, right before the music started. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. They didn't just try to humiliate me, I thought. They tried to erase the ones who believed in me. Still holding the card, I turned back to the aisle. The music was different now, stripped down, simple. The ceremony had changed, but the meaning hadn't. No flower girls. No cue for the officiant, just me. I took one step, then another, and then Jolene walked out from the rows and took my arm again. We walked together. Kyle stood waiting. When I reached him, he looked at me and said, "You didn't walk into my life, you stood beside it." That was enough. The ceremony was brief, honest, elegant in its stripped-down sincerity. No theater, no sugarcoating, just truth and choice and presence. Later, at the reception, Carmichael found me just as I finished a thank you with the caterer. He handed me a plain envelope. "That flash drive you asked for," he said. "This version has everything, including Vera's deleted messages." I didn't open it right away. I slipped it into the side pocket of my bag, zipped it closed, and turned back toward my guests. I'd already won the war, but I wasn't done reading the field. The apartment felt like a different place when we walked back in that evening. Not quieter, just emptied. It was the first time in weeks that silence didn't feel threatening. The living room was littered with half-unwrapped gifts, stray ribbons, and thank you cards stacked in uneven piles. My dress, still crisp in its protective garment bag, hung over the closet door, untouched by the chaos of the day. I slipped off my shoes at the door and walked barefoot across the hardwood floor. Each step felt heavier than it should have. Kyle followed behind, not saying much, but present in that quiet way he had, offering steadiness without needing to fill space. Healing doesn't happen in applause, I thought, trailing my fingers along the back of the couch. It happens in silence. I sat at the dining table and began sorting through the smaller gift bags while Kyle went to change out of his suit. The fifth bag I opened held something unexpected. Tucked between a thank you card and a scented candle was a folded note in handwriting I knew instantly. "It's okay, I wasn't up front. Seeing you strong was enough." "Mom." I froze. My breath caught in that way where you're not choking, but you're not breathing either. I stood, walked slowly to the balcony, dialed. "Hey, sweetheart," Jolene answered, voice soft, like she'd been waiting for this call. "You weren't in the front row," I said. There was a pause. "Someone told me my seat was reallocated last minute," she replied. "I didn't want to cause a scene." They tried to exile her, I thought, fury rising cold in my chest. In a moment meant to be hours. I didn't yell, didn't cry, just let the weight of that sink in. The next morning, I drove to her house alone. No makeup, no title, just jeans, a navy windbreaker, and two tired hands holding a fresh bouquet and a coffee cup. She opened the door, already dressed for the garden, no surprise on her face, just that knowing look only mothers have. We didn't say much, just sat at the table, fingers curled around warm mugs. "I should have seen it," I said finally. "Protected your seat the way you've always protected mine." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't fail me," she said. "You chose grace over fire, and I raised you to do that." There was nothing more to say. Some moments don't need more words. Later that day, I boxed up the wedding decor, the monogrammed banners, the menu cards, the flower centerpieces, and delivered them to a local shelter for women rebuilding after domestic violence. It felt right. Something beautiful repurposed, not wasted. When I got home, I found the small box from Vera still unopened on the counter. I didn't even look at the card, just scribbled across the top, "Return to sender." No forwarding address. Then I deleted Callista's number from my phone. No hesitation, just one tap, one swipe, one breath. Kyle emerged from the bedroom, holding the small envelope Carmichael had handed me at the reception. "Still want to see what's inside?" he asked. I took it from him, weighing it in my hand. "Only if it helps me close," I said. "Not reopen." He nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. The apartment was still. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't a silence I feared. It was the kind I welcomed. Kyle sat beside me on the couch, a mug of coffee in his hands. I had one too, untouched. Between us, on the coffee table, lay the small flash drive Carmichael had handed me after the ceremony. No label, no warning, just one more piece of truth waiting to be seen. I reached for it, slipped it into the side port of my laptop, and opened the folder titled Staging Evidence, Confirmed. It loaded in seconds, screenshots, emails, drafts of statements, all from Vera's account. Subject lines like "Backup plan if Delara breaks" and "Release this if she walks." One even had an email chain between Vera and a known tabloid editor. "We'll sell her meltdown as exclusive. People love a woman who cracks." I stared at the screen. The words didn't surprise me. They just made everything quieter inside. "They weren't just sabotaging a wedding," I whispered. They were preparing to market my downfall. Kyle didn't interrupt. He reached across the cushion and took my hand. That was enough. By noon, I was on a call with a military PR specialist. I'd worked with her before, on tougher things, bigger threats. She didn't need much explanation. This is a reputation threat, I told her. I need an image firewall. Within hours, we'd begun tracing every IP address from the emails, every social handle Vera and Callista had linked to burner accounts. A cybersecurity firm extracted metadata, timestamps, even chat logs. My team compiled it into a PDF titled, "This is what loyalty never looked like." I sent it to a select list, family, close friends, the ones who'd been quiet but supportive. That evening, I filed a civil injunction, coordinated defamation, conspiracy to commit reputational harm. My lawyer, former Air Force JAG, said I had more than enough. The next morning, Vera called. I recognized the number as blocked, but picked up anyway. I didn't need to be afraid of hearing her voice anymore. "It got out of hand," she said. Her voice cracked. "I just wanted better for Callista." "You didn't want better," I said. "You wanted me erased." Silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I waited a breath, then said, "I don't give second chances to erasers," and hung up. The air felt clearer after that, not light, just true. Later that week, I visited the base, not for anything official. I just sat with a group of young female recruits in the commons, answering their questions, listening more than I spoke. One asked me what it meant to command respect. "You don't have to explain your rank to people who only measure lace," I told her. That evening, Kyle and Jolene surprised me. They brought out a shadow box. Framed inside was my general's insignia, and, beside it, the vows I had written by hand. Not the ones spoken aloud, but the ones I wrote for myself. "Show up. Stand still. Don't flinch." I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel it, but because the tears had already been spent on people who no longer deserved them. That night, I wrote one last letter. It was short, sharp. "You tried to steal a stage. I built a platform, and you fell off it. I burned it. Watched the ashes scatter into the kitchen sink. Forgiveness isn't a requirement. Boundaries are." The next morning, while making tea, a news alert pinged my phone. Vera Nolan facing lawsuit over defamation campaign. Another woman, same pattern, different context. I didn't read the full article. I stirred honey into my mug, took a sip, and said quietly, "That's not my war anymore."